So real quickly, I forgot to mention in the video, so I put it here in the beginning. Um, I'll put links to the. Woo, chill it. I'll put links to the manifest in the description. Um, there's two of them. It's roughly, I believe, or exactly 150 cars, if I remember right. Um, but I'm also going to put a link to a tragedy that happened in Buffalo, New York when I was a child. I remember it distinctly. I was 6 years old, and what it was a propane tank explosion, and it was only a few hundred gallons of propane. It was less than 1,000, and when it blew up, it blew with such force that over a mile away, people's windows were shattered. Um, it killed 5 firefighters, I think one civilian, and something like 75 people were injured. And that was only a few hundred gallons of explosive fuel source. Um, so when I'm talking about the risk of letting those tanks and everything go through a BLEVE, which incidentally stands for boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. BLEVE, boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. So that was only a few hundred gallons, and it just decimated like 5 city blocks. It's an extraordinary story. And I remember it very vividly. So I'll put the link to the news footage about it, but there's multiple videos. There's a 3-part video from the Buffalo Fire Department themselves. And it just shows you the risk of allowing something to BLEVE and explode. Now, the amount of fuel that this train had at risk of BLEVEing, I wonder if that's even a word, but it was well over 100,000 gallons. So, something like on a magnitude of 100 times larger than the incident in Buffalo. Take that into consideration. I'll put that in the link below. But as you hear me speaking through this video, take into consideration this video of a very tragic incident. And that's all I got. Go ahead and enjoy this video, folks. Give me a like if you feel I deserve it. All right, have a great day. So, East Palestine, Ohio, February 3rd. A short video of the train passing by is captured, and in that video you see the axle tearing apart and leaving sparks and everything as it goes down the tracks. 20 miles on, the train would derail, and this huge disaster starts to unfold. So in the initial derailment, there was a good deal of fire, and I think it was a total of 11 tanks may have actually ruptured in the first. I'm not 100% sure on that, because I've seen the manifest of what the cars were. I did a little research on some of the chemicals, and they really are low-risk chemicals. 2 of them are used in making products that we use every day, plastic products and things that we come in contact with and even use to consume with, like water bottles and things like that. Those chemicals tend to dissipate into the natural environment rather quickly when they're not combined and formed into something in the process of making a plastic utensil or a bottle or whatever. Um, there was a two that when I googled, benzene was one of them, and it must have been the vinyl chloride had cancer risks associated with them. But again, they were relatively low risk as far as types of chemicals humans can come in contact with. Um, so, like train crashes, it ruptures and fires start, and the initial response includes them attacking, really just taking up a defensive position around the fire and dumping tons of water on it. And then down the track, any of the tanks that were not ruptured but were in threat of rupturing because of fire, those were being cooled by unmanned hand lines. They, set up a little monitor device that sets on the ground, and they point it at those things and just douse them with hundreds and hundreds of gallons of water, in an attempt to keep a BLEVE from happening. And a BLEVE, BLEVE, is what concerned the powers that be in East Palestine at the incident. It appears that as the fire raged around these other train cars, they were losing the battle of keeping them cool. And what's going to happen? So, as I was saying before I was interrupted by my dogs, it appears that they were trying to prevent a BLEVE. Which, after looking at the manifest and then looking at the chemicals of the cars that exploded, and the cars that they deliberately released to burn off, after doing a little research on those chemicals and seeing the relatively safe nature of them, there was one chemical that specifically kills fish, and that was pretty evident in the thousands of fish that they've found dead already. So they were fighting the fire, cooling the tanks that weren't blown up yet, and the decision was made, for whatever reason, I don't know, to secure the water cooling on the tanks. And in doing so, it was short order that things got to reach near catastrophe level, and an explosion was imminent. And they elected to release the pressure, which is done by releasing the fuel, and burning it off, and that's what they did. And to give you some kind of context, you Google or YouTube a BLEVE, BLEVE. But what you're going to find is they're really a unique explosion, in the sense that the fuel on the inside is being superheated and charged, and it's actually vaporizing into a gas, an aerosol type gas in the air. Not an aerosol, but a gas vapor in the air. And that in and of itself becomes pressurized. So you're dealing with a pressurized fuel source with, a huge amount of fuel behind it. So when that ruptures, you think of a balloon swelling up, and all the seams of the tank start to expand. Same thing, like a balloon swelling up. The tank starts to fracture and leak gas, and when it explodes, a typical explosion will have a heat, fire, and all that will be more concentrated to the actual blast in and of itself. So, I'm trying to think of something that might blow up, like a small lighter or whatever. No, that's a bad example. What happens is the gas gets so pressurized in there, and it becomes so much more flammable that when it does finally explode and releases, you have this big shock wave that goes out, but it's encompassed in flame. And the flame will go as far as the fuel will carry it within that shock wave. And there's something like 25,000 to 35,000 gallons of these products in each one of those tanks. It's just a tremendous amount of fuel that would have gone off. And in fact, they talk about nuking the town by doing what they did, by burning it. I don't think so. I think if they would have let those tanks blow off on their own, they would have had an absolute nuclear looking zone. I mean, the blast radius would have been huge, absolutely huge, and there would have been fire with it. And no matter what they did, they were going to have that huge plume of chemicals burning regardless. So preventing the levee was really all they could do. The products themselves were going to burn regardless, and instead of having a huge explosion, they took the method of controlling it and just letting it burn off. Which I'll say again, I mean, if they would have let those things explode, it would have been just 100 times worse, and you still would have had a huge fireball. So I don't know. Damned if you do, damned if you don't. Every one of those trucks that you see in all those videos, and the relative distance to the explosion would have been destroyed. They would have had to evacuate everything, obviously, before they did that or let it happen. But it would have been a catastrophe in and of itself. I think what they did, knowing what I know, I think what they did was most likely the best solution. They knew they were going to kill the fish. They knew that, and that was a risk they were willing to take. They knew at least two of the chemicals were nearly harmless to humans, almost completely harmless to us. And then there was some petroleum products, petroleum lube oil, I believe it was. So it may have been a fuel load that would have just absolutely leveled that town and everything. So I think right now what it's like I said, and even in sitting in where I am, I can speculate. Now it's been 14 days since the event started, and we all can speculate and be armchair quarterbacks, but that's just what I believe in my limited experience. I was a firefighter for a very short time, almost 3 years. But in the Navy, I was a boatswain's mate in the fuels division, and we handled fuels and firefighting. And I've had training on complex fuel fires, jet fuel fires, MoGas fires, diesel fuel fires, which also brings, I also want to know, did they use AFFF anywhere? AFFF, aqueous film forming foam, is a product. It looks something like a really heavy dose of soapy water, really frothy, and when you spray it onto a fire or onto onto something that's a risk of being on fire, it dampens it and extinguishes it. And what's nice is with water, if you apply it to a petroleum product, the fuel will float on top, and you could actually force the fire along on top of the water by trying to extinguish it. The foam smothers that, and it ends that. You're not at risk of the fuel running away in the water so much. I mean, still is water, but it's heavily laden with this phosphorus fuel, or phosphorus forming film forming foam, aqueous film forming. I can't even say it. Aqueous film forming foam, or maybe it's aqueous foam feeling, whatever. Look into it though, folks. I'd be curious if they used that. That might have saved the day. It might have extinguished that fire completely, and they might not have ever been at risk of a levee, let alone things burning for days on end like they have. So just my 2 cents on the whole subject, folks. If you know better, I'd love to hear, because I don't claim to be an expert on this by any means. Just like I said, literally just giving my 2 cents. And I'm open to hear anybody else's 2 cents. And certainly if you know that I'm wrong, I would appreciate to be corrected. I don't want to be, I'm not here to inform people by any means, but I feel if I'm going to speak about it, I ought to be truthful and have all the facts right and everything. So, but that's all I got. I'm going to sit here. I got a good video lined up on how to carve wood candles, just for decoration, and they're really pretty funny looking. And what I was thinking, instead of candles, tops to walking sticks. So these 5 faces they have, I was thinking how they would look on top of walking sticks, and I want to learn and see if I can carve them. So in closing, I just want to say that I don't think anything that I've said should diminish the fact that this is a catastrophe for the people of that area. And even though some of the chemicals were nearly harmless to humans, they were tests done at much less degree of concentration or amount. So I'm just simply saying that they had to let that fuel out. If they could not get the fire put out, the only thing they could do was vent, because the explosion was just going to happen regardless. And I just want to say, I don't want this to diminish from the fact that it's an absolute catastrophe for these people, and their lives are going to be changed forever, no doubt. And the untold is probably going to be tremendous, and we may not know it for decades. So I just wanted to clear that up. I think I'll often make arguments just simply because I think everything should be discussed from 2 points, at least, maybe 3 points of view. And that's kind of what I was doing, really, armchair quarterbacking and just giving my opinion. So keep that in mind, folks. I know I've gotten beaten up before for saying things that people just, they see some words and they get triggered automatically, no matter what context they're in. But that's all. In closing, that's all I really had. So thanks again, folks.